Hey guys, hope you're all safe and hopefully you are feeling well. This is a quick video for the new chapter, which is on animals. It's called What Are Animals? And we're actually going to be learning about a few things about the animals. I'm trying to get the reflection off my glasses, but we'll deal with it. All right, so animals. What are animals? Why are they different than plants? How do we identify them versus plants? Well, we already know that plants and animal cells are a little different. We know that plant cells are very similar to animal cells, but they differ in the fact that they have a cell wall and chloroplasts and a big vacuole for storing water. That cell wall gives them structure to help create a system where they can actually grow and get bigger. Whereas animals are a little different. Now, both cells in animals and plants have a nucleus inside their cell, but animals have things called nerve cells and muscle cells to help them move around. So these muscle cells and nerve cells help animals actually migrate and move and catch prey and whatever they need to do to get nutrition to convert to energy. Now remember, this is another way that we actually are different than plants. Plants can make their own energy through the process of photosynthesis, and animals cannot. We cannot do this thing called photosynthesis to actually make ourselves get energy. So we actually have to consume some nutrients. The animal egg is actually, animals are actually formed by these cells getting together and creating an egg, and then that's fertilized. That fertilized egg grows into an embryo, and that embryo becomes into an animal, and it's identified by its parent animals, which means a fly is going to turn into a fly, and so forth. So what I want to do is kind of get into a little bit about animals, and you guys are going to be reading, it looks like page 279, and that goes all the way to 284. It's a short one, but you guys can start looking at the classification of animals. Now, when we have all these animals, we have to be able to classify them and actually make them into some sort of semblance of meaning for all of us. And what we do that scientifically is we give them a name. And why do we give them scientific names? I know a fly is a fly and such like that. But what if I'm working with a researcher from a different country? They might call a fly by a different name. So when we have a base language, something that actually is done through our classification, our taxonomy of animals, we can actually still refer to them and kind of have a communication through researchers and such. So we actually classify these animals by their actual characteristics that they are giving us. So one of the things that we do is where we first start to classify is we classify them by their symmetry. Now, there's three different types of symmetry. So first of all, what is symmetry? Symmetry is the actual how things can be divided up, and if they actually are symmetrical, they are identical on each side if it's bilateral symmetry, and we'll get into that. So there's three different types of symmetry for animals. The first one is the most common. Now, it is called bilateral symmetry. Bilateral symmetry, let's see if I can find, we got a guest here. This is a fur seal pup, and he has bilateral symmetry. What does bilateral symmetry mean? Meaning that if we were to draw a line all the way through him, just drawing a line, we would see that the sides are equal. They each have an eye, they each have a nostril, bottom of mouth, flippers. So this little guy is bilateral symmetry. Bilateral. He's cute, huh? All right, so Then we also have what's known as radial symmetry. Now, we've all seen a sand dollar, and a sand dollar looks like a wheel. And if you were to divide the sand dollar up, or a sea star, you might notice that you can divide it up and have radial symmetry. Now, radial symmetry is where you can actually divide it in more ways than just one, in half. You can actually divide it almost like if it was an axle on a wheel and going down into multiple areas. Think of this. Think of a pizza pie. Now, if the pizza was made in such a way that it actually has pepperoni perfectly placed, and you could actually divide it into your 8 pieces that your family is going to eat, you would notice that, and if it's cut perfectly, you would notice that each slice would have the same amount of pepperoni, the same amount of cheese, and the same size. So that, if we were to cut a pizza pie, we would know that that would be radial symmetry. If we have another example, I'll give you another example here. I'm going to turn this phone a little quickly. And what you will see here is a fly. Now, a fly has what's known as bilateral symmetry. You can see that it is divided in half and each side is equal. But over here, we have a sea star. Now, this sea star actually is showing you radial symmetry. Now, it can be divided in such a way that each one of those sections is equal. All right? So, the confusing part is when we get into something that's a little more like an octopus or something. So I have this guy here. This guy right here. If we were to take it up here, he has 8 legs, so he could be like almost a radial symmetry. But what does he also have? He has a crown and a head. And this head can be divided symmetrically in a bilateral way. So this guy is bilateral because he actually has 2 eyes that are separated, one on each side. And that is a way that we can actually tell an octopus might have a different symmetry than a sea star. In addition to that, we can actually look at some other things that may not have either. Well, wait a minute. If it can't be divided bilaterally or radially, what's left? Well, there are some creatures out there that are animals that we might even think of them as plants, but there are animals that have no symmetry. And what do we call it when it's no symmetry or one side doesn't equal the other? It's asymmetrical. So there are some that actually have asymmetry. Now I'm going to show you quickly an example of that, and we'll see what that looks like. So again, we have bilateral symmetry. We have radial symmetry. And then a sea sponge is an example of something that is alive, is an animal, and yet it does not have symmetry. So what that means is it's asymmetrical, or it is actually having asymmetry for its symmetry. So that's one way that we can actually classify these things and actually group them so that we can actually talk about them in scientific terms. The other way is we actually have what's known as taxonomy. Taxonomy is how we actually break them up. Now, I'm going to throw in here a second video because there's going to be 3 videos total. Your second video is actually one that's really clever off the internet. It's good. It explains how things are classified and broken down into taxonomy. So watch that next. And then what I'll come back for the third video and talk about a little bit more about how we actually classify animals by adaptations, by their skeleton and stuff like that. So I'll be right back.